Welcome everyone to the theoretical coverage of round number 11 from the FIDE Candidates Tournament 2022. My name is Dejan Boškov, I'm Grandmaster from Bulgaria. As usual, we start with the least interesting game, if I can call it this way, from theoretical point of view. This is the game between Radjabov and Duda, where Radjabov have chosen the Reti opening, and as a result of the UD trades in the center, both the players got this position where the pawns, the central pawns, have disappeared. We have a typical situation in an open center, very symmetrical position, and as we know, the symmetrical positions as a rule are very close to the equality. Nevertheless, the players who are playing the Reti, as well as the players who are playing the Catalan, the semi-closed openings like the Queen's Indian defense, every once in a while they are getting similar positions, Queen's Gambits as well. So they are well prepared to extract some advantage in these situations. White has two typical ways of developing their queenside knight. One is knight a3, which happened in the game between Artemiev and Nepomniachtchi from the Warsaw, I'm not sure if this was the Bliss or the Rapid tournament. So after b4 in this situation, small tactic just to chase away the bishop. As bishop b4, you see queen d4, there is a problem for black. White managed to establish a knight on the c6 square, which as a rule is the key plan for the first player. Unfortunately for him, this was only temporary, and once that black found the maneuver knight d5 and knight d7, obviously he has anticipated this far in advance. It turned out that the rook on c6 is not as dangerous for the second player, and Nepomniachtchi held this position with ease. In this game, Radjabov is developing the knight on d2, which is a bit more flexible, and it is also related to a small positional trap in which black felt. Queen e7 looks like a very normal move in this situation, just connecting the rooks and as well defending the bishop on b7, but then after a3, a5 and b4, suddenly it transpired that black is having some tactical issues, and after the trades and queen a1 with a double attack against the bishop and the pawn on g7, Anton got the better position against Ivan Salgado in Linares 2020. I think this was the Spanish championship, and even though black saved himself, eventually the game ended in a draw, this didn't look specifically interesting for the second player. It looks dangerous in any case. But in this game, black is far more careful. Duda knows his stuff. He goes knight f6. So these ideas with the sacrifices and the double attacks on the long diagonal are no longer working. It is well covered. White reacts again with the move a3, and after a5 he jumps knight c4. This is a novelty, but not one that will change anything, if we have to be honest. Besides this, queen c2 was also a move, and it has been seen in a game between two not very famous players. Then little by little, the usual stuff in these positions is to start some tradings on the C and the D files, the peace treaty files, and of course here too, white doesn't have anything specific. Maybe even black looked a little bit more interesting in the final position. So knight c4, notice that b4, as I said, is not working for the first player, as there is nobody to attack on this diagonal. The knight on f6 is doing his job. Also, there is nobody to attack on a8 in comparison to that game that we have seen between Anton and Ivan Salgado. So knight c4, black is reacting with knight e7. This time there was nothing wrong with queen to e7 to defend the bishop. On knight e7, white jumped knight e5, once again trying to fight for the c6 square in this plan, but with the move b5, Radjabov is also securing that square for his queen. This maneuver is quite typical, trying to occupy the long diagonal whenever the bishops have been traded, and after some massive trades, it led to some equality. Rook e6 or rook e8, either case, it was very symmetrical. The pawns on the queen side are about to get traded afterwards, so this is easy equality. We're moving now to the game between Nakamura and Richard Rapport. In that game, Nakamura tried to do the same plan that led him to success the day before yesterday against Firouzja. This time the opening is the Sveshnikov, however, this is the only difference, but the plan that the American player is applying is still the same. So basically, he is opting for move g3 in this situation, which is relatively rare move. A4, a3, h4 are still more popular moves in this situation. h4, bishop h6, bishop e2, and bishop g4, for instance, has been played in a recent game between Duda and Radjabov. And after bishop e6, king f1 was the interesting concept that white was following. So basically white is trying to use these two squares, and he's eventually trying to play against this bad bishop on h6, eventually trying to prove that it's a bad piece. But here Nakamura have chosen the move g3, also a normal concept. So he is not abandoning the idea of trading the light squared bishops, but he may do it in a different way. For example, still h4, bishop h3 is one possibility, but he can also develop the bishop on g2, which would be a good square for the bishop in general. But also black has his own chances, and he's nicely developing his pieces. He's ready for the queenside counterplay. Here short castle has been played. Another move is a3, to which black is reacting in the same way with knight e7. He is in a hurry to challenge the knight on d5. In case of knight e3, he can always get rid of this weak, relatively, potentially bad bishop by taking on e3, and that's one of the types of positions which black is aiming for. Yes, he has a weakness on the 6, but it's a relative weakness. It's not something huge. Plus, he has left his good pieces. They're controlling the d5 square, which means that this advantage that white can eventually try to make use of is not working there. And besides, black is ready with his counterplay on the queen side. All in all, black doesn't have any problems in the games. Kuparadze versus Sinuldut. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Sunlidut, probably that's the proper pronunciation. Apologize to the person if he is watching this. Anyway, so after short castle, which was played in the game, Duda is reacting again with move knight e7 and on knight e3. This was still possible, this idea, but the Polish grandmaster, the Hungarian grandmaster, and soon to be Romanian grandmaster, as far as I know, played the move bishop to e6, which makes perfect sense as well. And now Nakamura came up with a novelty. He took on e7, but this is an obvious move from his previous game against Mr. Firouzja from yesterday. We know that he likes to trade these two for any of his two, basically. Ideally, he wants to keep a super knight on d5 versus a bad bishop on g5, but he wouldn't mind having a super bishop on d5 on the long diagonal versus that bishop on g5. So the trades are part of his game. And just to mention that before that, there was a correspondence game in which white played the obvious queen d3 move, to which black reacted not as that game of Kuparadze that we have seen previously. This was still possible, but black reacted with b4, direct play on the queen side. And then he did a typical maneuver later in the game. Once the queen came on this wonderful diagonal, the bishop also followed. And just like white wants to play opposite colored bishop endings, it turns out that black doesn't mind playing opposite colored bishop middle games or in games as long as his bishop is stronger. And here it is the black bishop which is stronger, so black is the one who is calling the shots. So that's paradoxal, but in these positions both the sides are looking for playing with opposite colored bishops. Again, the key factor, however, is who has the more active one. Okay, so knight e7, queen e7, and knight f5 was Nakamura's idea. Now it seems like black is forced to take on f5, and that's exactly what white is counting on. In this particular case, he will have the super bishop versus the bad bishop on g5. This one might look active, but in reality it's an empty bishop. It's not influencing the battle which is happening on the queen side. So once the bishop comes on d5, maybe the queen will follow to f3, or depending on the situation on d3. Then white will start playing for two weaknesses. One weakness would be the king side. That pawn on f7 eventually could be something to be under attack. So white can prepare the advance of the pawns like this and king side attack, but he may also look for time to e4 to create a second weakness on the queen side. and maybe to create a pass pawn, and then the bishop on d5 will be dominating. So definitely a position for black to avoid, unless he has something forcing like this, but it doesn't seem like this is appealing. And even though the computer says it's playable, for the human eye it looks very, very risky. Rapport, on the other hand, came very well prepared, or he just has seen very clearly what happens next, and he equalized in a brilliant way with queen d8. Queen a7 was also interesting, but queen d8 makes perfect sense. And now Nakamura has nothing else but to take on d6 with the queen, because if he takes with the knight, this knight there could be trapped after g6. There is no way out for that piece. Black is threatening bishop e7, rook b6 to simply capture it. And in case of f4, bishop e7 and fe5, f6, the support of the knight is disappearing, and still it's going to get lost. So literally no other chance for white but to take on f6 with the queen, which is what he did. Now comes g6. He could have also taken on d6 and then rook d8, but he wants to force the opponent to take like this. If the knight retreats on e3, then Rapport's idea is probably just to take it and then to occupy the only open file. Once that this happens, he will be the master and the ruler of the second rank. Notice that this pawn is also hanging, so even rook f1 is not a move for white, which means that black is already better. Nakamura had to play carefully to keep the balance here. To maintain the balance, he played the move h4, bishop came back on f6. This was also possible with unclear play and with compensation for the pawn, even in this situation, namely because this king is coming to capture the pawn on g5. But bishop f6 was very solid as well. The knight has to retreat. Then comes rook d2. Again, black is the first one to occupy the open file. The threats are very concrete there. b3 forced, a4 a clash. Black better prepared for the clash. And Nakamura understood that if this pressure continues, if he, for example, takes on a4, that after b takes a4 followed by a3, rook b2, he would be losing the battle on the queen side. So he gave back the pawn and entered this position where obviously black has left the problems behind. Next game is between Nepomniachtchi and Firouzja. Actually, I incorrectly mentioned that Nepomniachtchi... so I mentioned correctly that Nakamura have beaten Firouzja yesterday, yes. So this one was interesting that white played this interesting c4 move. So quite an original opening by the freshly minted French grandmaster of Iranian descent. So c4 is a move that has been played regularly by Grandmaster Movsesyan, who, however, had an independent and different flavor from what happens here. So knight c6 played by Nepomniachtchi was met with d3, whereas Movsesyan himself, he liked to play knight c3 in these positions, and after the trade to play this pawn construction and to play for the advantage like this, followed by bishop e3. That's the game of Movsesyan against Friedman. I just want to mention that Nepomniachtchi himself has a lot of experience in this line with the white pieces. And he has faced the move bishop e7 in this situation, and after that he developed his pieces like that. And by the way, he distracted an opponent of his, Sugurov, here with the following line: bishop g5, and after bishop g5, bishop takes h7. That was a game, spectacular game by the Russian grandmaster, and he played bishop h7 almost instantaneously. After king takes an h4, that was the point, obviously homemade, homebrewed, and it turned out that that even though black found this clever bishop d2 move in this situation, he didn't have enough for the equality. Had he gone with the bishop back on h6, Nepomniachtchi's idea was that after knight g5 check and the capture, he would have regained the piece, obviously, with decisive advantage after that extra pawn plus decisive attack. And if the bishop has gone to any other square, for instance, I'm not even sure where can it go after h4, to be honest with you. Maybe bishop f4, still no change. The point is that Now queen g5 is not possible because of the check, obviously. So this is why he had to find this tricky bishop d2 idea. But again, even though he found the tricky bishop d2 idea, white was still up a pawn and had better attacking prospects on the king side. So Nepomniachtchi won this game. Obviously, Nepomniachtchi is very knowledgeable about this line, and Firouzja is risking when he's playing like this. But anyway, Firouzja has nothing to lose, and he's trying his best to get some play. It's funny to see that Nepomniachtchi has adopted Caruana's winning approach from Berlin from a few years back, when Caruana also introduced the Petrov defense at those candidates, and he managed to win the tournament with the Petrov defense. Not only that he carefully defended the positions, but he won a lot of points with the black pieces. Anyway, Firouzja here is playing in a creative way. Bishop e7 is solid rather than d5, which happened in another game between two Russian grandmasters, Vityugov and Paravian. I'm pretty sure that Nepomniachtchi was aware of that one. White is capable of winning the pawn on c6, but that's not the end of it. Then it's becoming really very, very wild and very interesting after rook e1 and queen f5. Quite an irregular position. It's even hard to assess what's happening here. But that's not exactly what the Russian is aiming for. He goes for bishop e7, and after d5 he jumps with the knight on e5. And here comes the novelty, the move knight d4. Trying to keep more pieces on the board is the novelty. Basically, white says, okay, I have the space advantage. I don't want to trade you, because if I trade you, you will get your pieces out like this. And after that, okay, c6 will happen at some point. So black doesn't seem to have any problem. If I go bishop e2, which is a straightforward developing move, then again, you will be happier from trading some pieces. Now, most likely Nepomniachtchi would not intend to play h5. I don't know, maybe he intended to play h5, which is stopping the g4 further gain of space for white. And then bishop f5 followed by queen d7, which was the game between Kostyuk and Tan. What exactly did he wish to do? I'm not sure in that case. We will see in the future. But in any case, Firouzja says, I need to keep more pieces alive, and he jumps knight d4. Very interesting approach. Now, probably short castle that has been played in the game wasn't the most accurate. It looks like c6 is promising some extra possibilities to the second player. After knight c3, the most obvious move, he can still go bishop g4 like in the game, and then after f3, bishop d7, bishop e2, he may trade, and this extra possibility of queen a5 is helping him to generate threats before the opponent. Also in this line, after bishop g4, bishop e2, okay, as we said, black is happy to trade some pieces, and it's similar to the game, but in a more favorable situation for the second player. Short castle has been met with knight c3, again the most obvious move, but here this looks a bit more flexible, bishop e2. So basically he's trying to fight the opponent's bishop. Probably bishop g4 is still an option though, as if knight e4 and short castle, bishop f6, that seems somewhat strange with the knight on e4. I know that the machine is offering this, but I'm not a big fan, to be honest with you. In any case, that was slightly more flexible. So the move order will be very important in the future when playing these type of positions, and I'm sure that this will be seen more and more in the future, as it looks like a very reasonable approach for the first player. Now bishop g4, and Firouzja reacted with f3, after which he didn't gain much of the opening. Bishop e2 followed by queen e2, and now in case of c6 to take it, followed by short castle, and to play against the potential weaknesses was one plan for the first player. And another plan that black could have tried here would have been rook e8, but in either case it seems like white is doing a little bit better. But Firouzja for some reason didn't want to trade. We said that this was his grand plan from the beginning. So yes, he played the move f3, and after bishop d7, bishop e2, c6, castle, takes, and queen b6. Even though black is a bit cramped, he has enough space for his pieces. To maneuver g4 was the beginning of a risky operation, So white is trying to gain some more space on the king side, but in the process he is also opening himself. And all in all, this ended badly for the first player after f4 and this sacrifice on f4, followed by queen b2. So white didn't have enough he didn't have enough space and enough strength to somehow make this whole idea work. On knight e4, rook c4, his pieces started to hang, and all in all, black won with spectacular counterattack afterwards, and Nepomniachtchi is just a very short step away from qualifying and paying another visit to the world champion himself. Last game from the round was the one between the other two close pursuers, Caruana versus Liren. It was a real Lopez, and as expected, Caruana is avoiding the Marshall counter gambit, in which Liren is one of the leading specialists in the world. On bishop b7 he played for d3, and after d6 this flexible move bishop d2 has been played. Caruana previously has tried also knight c3, and after bishop a2 and b4, knight e2, c5, that was his game against Adams. But he's trying to prevent this knight a5 move here with the move bishop d2, at least for the time being. Dink is reacting with queen d7. Not that black doesn't have any other moves. He has other moves as well. There is also the play in the spirit of Tomaszewski like this, to push the pawn on b4 a little bit earlier. And often black is sacrificing the b pawn in these positions, at least temporary, but then he's regaining it, and he's trying to quickly expel the opponent's pieces. This looks equalish. So Liren goes for queen d7 instead of this, and on knight c3 he sticks to the plan with knight a5. Nevertheless, bishop a2 has been played, and now b4 was the answer by the Chinese grandmaster. c5 is the other way of playing it, and c5 has been played also in a top game recently between Carlsen and who was his opponent, and Bakro. Yes, so I want to show a little bit of this game, because after that black reacted with d5, and again he reached the position in the spirit of the Marshall gambit. He was constantly sacrificing the pawn on e5 until the opponent took it, and the spirit of this game was obviously not something that white wished to repeat. So nevertheless, at least whenever you're playing against a world champion, you're not very, very pleased to repeat this thing. Nevertheless, Caruana had something in store there, and Liren decided to switch to the b4 move instead of this. On b4, knight e2 was played, c5, knight g3, and rook b8 is a smart move by the second player, preparing the move b3. It's a very good idea. And now Caruana opted for knight h4, which turned out to be a novelty. It's an obvious move. Should have been considered by black, obviously. Before that, knight f5 has been played, direct jump with the knight close to the opponent's king, but then after bishop d8 and h3, b3 turned out to be strong for black. And after the massive trades and bishop c6, white had to be careful here not to allow the queen side to get destroyed. He wasn't careful in the game between Duda and Durabeli. He played bishop c3, rook c1 was the move, and after knight e8, knight e3, and knight c7, knight c4, Hedon, the Azerbaijani grandmaster, blundered. In one move, he played knight e6, which allowed the nice little trick knight takes d6 with white's advantage. And had he had played the move f6, it would have been black who is significantly better here, as he is preparing the move d5. The bishops are coming into life. The extra pawn of white counts for nothing. Actually, black will be the one to attack those pawns in the future. There is also the maneuver with the knight coming all the way to d4 or maybe to f4, depending on the circumstances. So in any case, it would be black's position. c3 instead of knight h4 has been also played, trying to resolve the tension on the queen side, but there too, b3 is strong for the second player, and they will try after that to make sure that this bishop is not going to see the light anytime soon. And this is the game between Bjerre and Andersen, played in Germany 2020. Very complex position. If white doesn't bring the bishop out, he will be obviously close to losing this because his rook is also suffering, but yeah, he wants to prepare this and to bring it out when the black pawns might be suffering on the queen side. So both the sides are risking very seriously. And what about the move knight h4? Well, knight f5 is on the agenda. Black is playing the move g6. Not that he's stopping the knight f5 move, but he's opening some more room for his pieces on the king side. He's not afraid of f4. As usual, he's going to react with the move b3 before doing anything else on the other side. And Caruana therefore goes for bishop h6, and on rook e8 he jumps knight f5. So as I told you, that's not something that black can stop. It's a typical positional sacrifice. If black captures that one, even if he goes for b3, he will be suffering after cb3 as the pawn is ready to sacrifice back itself and to open up this diagonal. Plus, of course, white is threatening to positionally come and meet the opponent like this or like this. The rook lifts or the queen lifts are very, very powerful tools here for the first player. So better not take this one. Better also avoid the move bishop f8, which is what Dink is doing, because there will be the move bishop g5. And finally, what the Chinese grandmaster played bishop d8 is the Reti reaction. When it turns out that the knight on f5 doesn't really have an excellent spot where to go, and the bishop on h6 sometimes could be in danger as well if he's not careful, he decided to jump on this slightly strange square, knight g7, but apparently this is again computer assisted move. No human being, I believe, will play like this unless they see very deeply and very clearly and they don't have this backup of the computer that the computer says, okay, you can do this. So knight g7 played rook f8, h3 to stop knight g4 and to secure the position of the knight on g7. Okay, so it is white who fianchetted the knight on g7 in the opponent's camp, but this doesn't really yield him anything after the strong move b3. So b3 is still very strong, still very good. I would say the only move in this situation too, because if he does nothing like knight c6, let's say for example bring the knight into the center, then white can continue bringing his pieces closer to the king side, and the knight f5 idea will start become realistic very, very soon. This one or the other one, or maybe knight h5 as well, and then regroupment on the king side might lead to some checkmates. But b3 is cutting that bishop from the happening on the king side, and Caruana decided to take with the bishop. Otherwise the bishop would have been buried anyway after cb3 and knight c6, knight b4. He is temporarily winning a pawn, but we have seen multiple times that black is fine with that. Now Dink is highlighting the fact that the knight is not ideal on g7 anymore. He's stepping away from the possible attacks on the g file as well. So, and he's forcing matters. This looks like the only move for white. Knight e6 takes, in return bishop a5. All of this looks very clear cut. I suspect that both the players would have been still in their prep at this point. Takes on e1, takes on e1, and he took on b3 with the rook. Taking with the queen was perfectly fine too, and in either case I would say that black didn't have any problems whatsoever at the stage of the game. So all in all, equal position. And that was everything from today's round. Thanks for watching this. See you around. Take care.